Why do I do this? Because I'm super lazy. I don't want a new technique just because I lean someone over. So in this lesson, what we're going to be working on are poses that aren't exactly friendly, right? From the standpoint of their space or their foreshortening. How would I approach this? What I would always do is organize my rhythms like this in a standing view. So the opposite is now happening. The way I would approach this is by flipping it. So if I want to bend someone, all I'm going to do is take this sequence of line and then flip it. So the stretched forward figure, I put this line on the back. I'm not drawing this one yet. I'm just showing you the theory or the way I'm understanding it. And then I'll put thoracic, lumbar, pelvis there. And I start to get the feeling of pinch and then the feeling of stretch across the back. And why do I do this? Because I'm super lazy. I don't want a new technique just because I lean someone over. And then we could put our neck up here. So I just take what exists and then you could kind of flip it and then angle it a different way to match the lean. So in this one, we could start the same way with that in mind. Here's my head, and my perspective, cervical. So I just did a wrap. That's what I meant by perspective, just a wrapping line there. Stretch. I'm just kind of adjusting my formula of line. Instead of going cervical, thoracic, bouncing down like I would start here, now I'm going instead to this one, and then backfill, or put in here the thoracic, what would normally be the thoracic, lumbar, and then maybe pelvis. So that, I think, gets me closer to the lean, and then now I'm going to do my femur. The next thing is, when I start to have poses collapse or bend or break that standard norm, I can't always use my large relational measurements. Like the proportion chart is fantastic. I love when the world divides into halves, but that doesn't always happen. At the end of this course, you should come away with a couple different approaches to think gesture, and then I hope a broad enough understanding of the subject to make your own innovations on it. So sometimes, even though this is an analytic approach, sometimes I will always balance in or integrate observational. These are the two sides of the coin that I'm always working with. So maybe it's nice in here to kind of say, oh, well, if I did like a plumb line across, the knee is like this much lower than the head or something. So relational measurements or those types of things, there's no reason not to include them. It's just a way to organize information, but everything should be welcome as long as it makes sense to your idea. So now I feel comfortable with that leg and kind of where I want it. And then that would change into the knee, that rhythm, and then that asymmetry kind of comes into the lower leg. Here's my foot shape. So let's see what kind of sock shape we get here. There's my flow into the top, and here's my weight. I like the feeling of like the figure maybe being out of balance, of course, because that's my thing. So having the head a little bit farther forward or lower is appealing to me. Happens sometimes automatically. Here's the back leg. That's coming out of the pelvis. On that other side, knee, and then here's the flow into the tibia. And then this feels like a little closer to profile. So there. So now, since this has moved forward, it's only foreshortened a little bit, but I'm going to show the wrapping line this way. Right, so what I want this to show is that all of the rib cage is coming down. I think it's important to point out that ultimately, this is a foundation again for me to get to a point in the drawing where I'm literally describing these geometries in anticipation of muscle. So the reason now that I'm not consumed with boxing and describing space and even though I'd see the value in it, is that it's just not at that stage for me. But it does free my thinking of making the gesture up to know that that happens later. I can just focus on the posing here with knowledge that comes. So if you ever feel like, oh, it would just be so much easier if you just do that, well, that would be the reason why. And then pelvis, got the legs. Let's do some arms. So maybe we work with our scapula here. So I got that shoulder blade or that medial border. And then that kind of pulls into the deltoid. The humerus coming back behind the knee, that's kind of a dangerous area for me, right? So what I'm starting to notice in the development of my drawing is I don't want a tangent. It's already hard enough that there's foreshortening and space collapsing. So I don't want to flirt with that maybe. So I can make a change here. Maybe I decide to bring that in a way that maybe doesn't get as close to the outside. So maybe I'll put it here. I kind of end my elbow there, but kind of taking into account I'd have leg that would develop back, and then bring my arm this way. So in this sense, when I'm dealing with kind of difficult poses or foreshortening or bending, but I'm kind of using all tools to not just describe the figure quickly with rhythm, but try to set it up so that it's a pose that I think I'll welcome developing and enjoy the finished result. So moving that, trying to avoid the tangent is all in anticipation. Well, this looks pretty close to what we've been talking about as the norm, really seeing the rib cage push or shift away, and then the pelvis shift and push back. So now we have more in out. So in this case, I would focus on shortening these lines to the degree that I want them to go away more quickly, and then follow that up by emphasizing the wrap, and then the pelvis opposite, right? Opposite in the wrap, but the same principle in terms of making the line shorter. And then arm, right? So that arm, the length is going to be maybe just that long. And then in terms of my follow through for gesture, getting that perspective, something like this, look at the lower arm. Maybe it's only that long. And so when these start to feel a little bit more challenging, or you're kind of getting in the weeds of kind of the difficult aspects of posing, keep in mind the goal. There's a reason that you're working to do this, because you want to put Kratos killing a new god in a really cool position with his elbow coming directly at the camera. I will have my revenge. This is challenging to learn right now, but the reward of having learned it is going to mean that I'm going to be capable of showing so much more range in terms of not just the figure feeling rhythmic top down, but to and from the camera. There's still the rhythm, the animated, active, fun, lyrical movement hasn't left. It's just gotten knotted. I am trying to work slowly and I am shortening these lines, but at no point is my rhythm going away. I haven't lost that. That's still very much foregrounded. And it's foregrounded for all the reasons that we started. That would be something to just make sure that you keep always cognizant of, just as little reminders. I do it all the time. So then this one, instead of just being parallel, this comes closer. So now we're starting to move the figure toward the camera or the leg, and then this goes back. So same principle, get that same length, match the femur above, but then start to push that. Here the challenge was just how do I fold the gesture? Right, so this is again probably the most common questions. Well, how do I do it when it's straight on? Well, there's lots of options, right? Your options could be you draw it as is, you push asymmetry in the back and the forth, the 3D asymmetry, or like another viable option is just change it. What's wrong with changing it? Why not turn it a bit or try to create some movement if you feel like it's there? So that might be something that we try to do here. Like I realize that it's straight up and down, and if I am absolutely committed to that structuring, I would still say that let's just draw the contour for a second. Like it looks like this. There is some pinch and stretch, but sure, maybe the spine's directly in the middle. Then what I would be trying to do is showing you the forward-backward projection of form, that the ribcage goes away in space, and that the pelvis in this view comes toward you in space. That's asymmetry, but in space. And that's good because our figure, our body, wouldn't stay upright if there wasn't a asymmetrical perspective balance. If you were designed so that your rib cage like just came forward and your pelvis kept coming forward, that'd be weird, right? And your leg, we would have landed on our backs long ago and then evolved maybe as quadrupeds or something. That would be creepy and weird. So there is the same asymmetrical balance of space is the point. Or maybe you play with an asymmetry of tilts in the shoulders. Right? The shoulders have their own unique expressive quality. Maybe on your gestures, you could include a tilt line like that for shoulders. Maybe try experimenting with that. I think it's really fun. So here's the stretch. Here's your lumbar. Here's that pelvis. Right, so I kind of got at my same problematic over there, but the only difference is my intention is never to close off shapes when I'm doing this. I'll preempt another question, but aren't you just drawing the outsides? No. Not intentionally. All of my lines are always intended to be somewhat on the inside because I anticipate building to the contour. When I was learning this as a student, my challenge to myself was, you can't draw the contour unless you know what it is. Oh, that's the lat, and that comes across and around the rib cage, hugs it, then turn. The outside isn't just the shape, it's an extension of everything you know on the inside. So whenever I'm doing these lines, I'm anticipating my build to end somewhere out there, right? So I can slowly creep up on it because it's hard, right? And sometimes I need that forgiving aspect to a drawing. Not everybody does, but I definitely do. So here's some wraps for that. And then we can say our pelvis. I always like to exaggerate this. I'm always skeptical of people that kind of tilt the pelvis from this angle too far forward. That's asking a lot of your lumbar spine to change direction. Like instead of the spine going like this, if you tilt your pelvis forward, you're saying the lumbar spine is going that way, which is uncomfortable. So now I don't see legs, right? So I get a little bit of a leg. So what would that be? Maybe a gesture line like that, and then I wrap. I'm not foreshortening by stacking shape. I've just given you a hint of a gesture, and then I've pushed a wrapping line. And then on this side, I get my lower leg. So that's coming back here. Here's my foot shape. So let's try to find that asymmetry of the foot. And then another one here. And then on the arms, so scapula shape, shoulder, same principle. So when a limb is foreshortened, there's no more foreshortening than that leg there, that long, where normally our arm would be that long, right? That would be the basic proportional relationship, elbow equals bottom of rib cage. So here this goes forward, use your rubber bands, and then that goes up. A cool move behind the hair or head. And then on this side, maybe we can find some nice design elements. Let's start to think about design more. Let's take the back of that thoracic and just bring it up. That looks kind of nice. It goes slightly away. And maybe this comes across and over. And all the while, think about, oh, cool, I learned in short how to pose out this really cool position. I think I might have an idea for a character that I want to put in a position like that or something, so that it's never just an isolated exercise in a vacuum. Gesture is notational so that you have all this information to give to things that you would like to draw. Usually in a life drawing class, gestures will be done in a minute. Speed just comes with practice. If it takes you 5 minutes to get here and you feel good about it, that's awesome. Let's try this one. It's not closed in as a pose, but it exhibits some of the same aspects of difficulty the other ones did. So here's my head. Reclining poses, I see strange things happening. The idea of foreshortening, the solve for it, as I've been saying, is that you make the line shorter. But what I mostly see people do is make things longer, the opposite. I tend to see people, instead of in a pose like this, where maybe we start to maybe we can get close to our average, but bring it in a little bit. I tend to see people doing this, 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 right? And it kind of get progressively longer to the body parts. I'm not sure why, but I can relate to it because I've done it myself. So it's just something to be aware of, that really you're looking to do the opposite of that. So here's my lumbar and my pelvis. The thing that I am, without in this is that kind of continued expectation for having a goal in the bottom being the weight-bearing leg. So what becomes difficult here is weight-bearing pelvis or weight-bearing seat. Right? So, but think of it as just like a structure. So I have a mass that's here, and it's kind of leaning that way. And then without something to support it out here, it's going to fall over. So sometimes that's a fun way to think about how your poses are maintained, like how weight works. So there's the ground here, and then we have, so this is going to suck. Right, but sometimes you have that thought when you're drawing, like, oh no, like the leg's coming right out at me. But it's all right, we know how to handle that. So just shorten the line, push the wraps, and you could just use your knee there as like a template for what you want. And then this leg goes back. So same thing, just shorten that line and then push your wraps back. So what might be, nice is that what would be helpful is start to get comfortable drawing ellipses. Like all the foundation exercises in the foundation Proko drawing course would be probably awesome for that, right? Or just practicing ellipses, getting comfortable doing your, sometimes ellipse exercises you could do, like kind of gradually opening them, or if you really struggle with ellipses, you could try starting with a plane and then angling your plane and building ellipses in. But I am relying quite a bit on that technical aspect of the drawing to get the forward and back in space. And so here would be this leg, and that kind of comes out a bit, but that knee lines up more or less with the bottom of this knee. So here's me using a relational measurement to try to make an understanding of that. And then the lower leg just kind of does what we would expect. this arm, which I said was important for getting that weight. So maybe I build the rhythm off that stretch into the shoulder. And now let's try to incorporate more line weight. Right, so we could tell the viewer about the importance of this leg. Maybe we could push some darker lines. Right, start to treat these now, as you get more comfortable, start to treat them as compositions. Right, so line weight could be a way to direct the eye somewhere. And if they become more compositions or exercises and compositions, then you're really starting to think of them as plans for what you might develop. So up and then back, all this gets stretched, and then maybe we darken this line. So that gives my viewer the understanding that what's important here, just based on where I've exercised some artistic energy, is here and here. And in this pose is suspended in terms of weight between those two. So difficulties in this one could be the overlapping of the arms in front of the body, the positioning and perspective of the legs, the way that the weight is kind of dispersed through the seat and then into the hips and legs. So it's always head to kind of primary area of weight. This leg goes back, maybe a little bit slightly forward. So that's thinking the wraps. This comes forward, so a little bit shorter in line. Here's the wrap on that, and then back. There's my foot. And then same thing in terms of line weight. Maybe now we bring a little bit more attention here just to pop these out in space. So I don't feel like it's necessary to come in and resolve shape. But I like how this comes up and cradles the bottom of the head, right? That hand has a great S curve to it that tracks on the roll or the tilt of that head. And my shoulder on this side drops. This comes slightly forward and up. But in this, maybe in more of a design sense, I'm thinking about joining rhythm. How does this arm flow into this arm, flow into that head, kind of create continued interest in the portrait? What would I do here? I'd probably just give up. So here's the same principle of that forward balance that we spent a little time discussing. Forward balance, forward projection of the body into that lean. So we've dealt with this from the side and a little bit on the crouching in that top row. But here I want to show it, in space. So we're in that extreme foreshortening. So the S curve, and then we do the thoracic lumbar, shorten the lines. Here's my pelvis. So I think you already have a good idea how to approach this. You're just moving it toward us. And then a femur, lower leg, up on the foot. Here's my head. Now, where's that back leg? Back leg is here. And then let's push it this way. Maybe I could start to push some of that invention. Invention just being, it doesn't have to originate as a brand new idea from your head, but maybe you can invent a different position based on a couple parts. The history of painting is largely painters going to the museum, looking at existing compositions, and then riffing off of those figures and compositions. Right? And those painters throughout history, whether it's Cézanne or Manet or whoever, weren't accused of plagiarism. Right? They're taking and playing with conventions. So maybe something like that kind of broadens our pose out a little bit. Maybe I'm exploring something that might feel a little bit stable or more stable. Right? So trying to do the opposite, where this feels like it has less stability. And then let's include that arm, so shoulder. I think what I like here is maybe I'll just create a longer S curve so it feels like it builds into that nice design of the leg coming forward. I like the shared sense of rhythm and direction. I don't like the quality of overlap. So maybe I'll move that a little bit forward. You have to push the head out some. And then I like how this comes back. I like that this arm is doing the same thing as this arm, but up. I think that makes a fun, directional line up and down through the kind of the more static area of the torso there. And you could try to, if you want, you could wrap that up just with kind of pushing your space. But when the drawing is notationally done for you, it's done. Right? There's no gesture police or anybody that's going to come say, you need to do a little bit more here. You really blew it on that shoulder, or, doesn't look like the pose. But when you feel like it's good, it's good. I solved my forward lean. I have a sense of how I would build this forward. For these two, I think their challenge exists in the fact that they're more symmetrical. And it's surprising, right? You would think that the more dynamic poses are the harder ones. People never really struggle with those in my experience. It's always the subtle ones. So how would I deal with this? Let's say it's really close to being straight, or let's just make it straight. Again, I know I've talked about this a little bit, but it's worth repeating, because I don't want to answer it ever again. So let's say the pose is doing this. My argument is that it doesn't mean that the spine is doing that, right? The spine would always be doing what the spine does, which is to a certain extent counterbalance your 3 core masses so that you can move. So what I'm going to solve this for or with is that quality of perspective asymmetry. I always make my rib cage from the back, kind of have that wrapping line going down and then gradually up and forward to build that compatibility with the direction of the neck and space. So that go that way. The foreshortening qualities of the leg. We've talked about this a good amount now, so I hope you feel more comfortable with that. Shorter line, open your wraps. Lower leg, kind of play off the length of the upper leg so you don't have to rethink it. And then any pose like this, you can always just lay in a quick asymmetrical footprint. Same thing here. And then for your shoulder blades, without the arms moving, the shoulder blades are naturally about a head width apart. So if I see it pulling forward, sometimes I'll pull the line, but if the arm is kind of intensely reaching forward, but for the most part, I'll just kind of keep it in the same place. This goes here, and so that comes out at about this angle, and then there's very little, if any, forearm or hand behind. So you look at this and say, well, is there a hand there? Yeah, so let's do a small shape. And then this, I'm going to build off the neck. Here's the humerus, comes out this way. So now, if anybody asks me how you draw the straight on view, I will just make you watch this. So what would I do in this one? So now let's be more generous with the interpretation, because on the last one we did kind of boxed it out to be very severe. So maybe I'll do my side to side pinch. So I see there's a shifting of weight. So here's my spine rhythms, my setup. Same thing though, right? If you feel like there's not enough turn, or if it's symmetrical, then really push this. Push that this comes forward. It's not the best, but it's good enough to get you moving and on to the next step. I think people get stuck with this front and back idea, because they start to adopt the idea or the thought that the gesture is the end of the drawing. It's just notational, right? It's just for you to get started, to develop. So if this were the end of the drawing, that would be weird, one. But two, right, that's too much pressure, right? There's a whole list of steps that would come after this, where I would take this from, my loose lay-in to a finished drawing. So it's just what you need to understand that position. And so that goes back, shorter line, push the wrap. You can compare it to this one, where each arm would be of equal length, back and behind. And then foreshortening for the legs, so maybe shorter. And then on this side, it kind of comes back in this way. And you can push our wraps this way. And then maybe get a little bit back here. So I hope this discussion and kind of draw through of our basic poses here helps give you a sense of how to take what we know or what we started out with and maybe aim it at some poses that aren't exactly friendly. In this course, what you're going to learn is how to pose your figures, how to think about the internal dynamics of your figures, proportion, how to think about what design is and how you might want your figure to look slightly different based on what you want to prioritize in the final result of what it is you intend to make. Really with a focus and emphasis on organizing your thoughts and making gesture something that doesn't have to be mysterious or ambiguous. So I'm giving it some structure, of course, and some steps. Check it out. It's at proko.com/Hampton. I'll see you there.